Everybody. Well, I would like to welcome everyone to our program this evening. Democracy Tables You Asked, Police, Community, and Justice. My name is Glenn Perkins, and I'm from the Greensboro History Museum. And we have been doing this Democracy Tables project for several months now. It's been an extension of our Project Democracy Initiative at the museum, exploring American democracy and history through programs and community conversations. And this is our community conversation. So we've been inviting people to discuss important topics to Greensboro, topics that give them an opportunity to engage with our city, to be able to have a say in our city. We talked about voting last year, and this year we are talking about, we're starting conversations about police, community, and justice. We've had several conversations, and we'll be talking about those in a moment, but tonight we're bringing you some answers from questions that have come up during those programs. So I'm going to turn it over a little bit right now and introduce my colleague in this project, Jessica Clifford, who is the project coordinator for Democracy Tables, and she'll tell you a little bit more about the partnership behind this.
Yeah, thank you so much, Glenn. So for those of you who have been part of Democracy Tables and those who haven't, it is a collaboration between Greensboro History Museum and UNCG's Department of Communication Studies. So over the past few weeks, we've brought together nearly 100 people for small group conversations about police, community, and justice, as Glenn was mentioning. People shared a range of experiences and ideas about this issue. So tonight's questions come from listening to those conversations from participants' evaluations. So I'll hand it back off to you, Glenn.
Thanks, Jess. So we've organized a panel of community experts to answer those questions tonight. And we're really honored and thrilled to welcome tonight Captain Richard L. Alston from the Greensboro Police Department's Patrol Division. Hello, Captain Alston. Captain Teresa Biffle from the Greensboro Police Department's Training Division. Welcome. Kay Brown, who's on the Criminal Justice Advisory Commission for the City of Greensboro. James Mays Esquire, who's an attorney at law with many years of experience in criminal justice issues in numerous capacities. And we have Dr. Will Pizio, professor of criminal justice at Guilford College. So thank you all so much for taking the time to be here and for answering some questions. So we're going to be sharing some of these, and I think these are challenging questions that came up from our Democracy Tables participants. And, a lot of them do revolve around anxiety about the police, but I also want to point out as we get started that people repeatedly stated a desire for more communication and more involvement between the police and the community. So I hope that we're encouraging that, continuing that process here tonight as part of this program. And I know we'll be learning a lot more about efforts on all sides, from the police department and from the community as we move along this evening. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Jessica to get us started.
Oops, I was on mute. I'm sorry. So for the first part of our discussion today is going to be on community perception and fear. So many people in the Democracy Table conversations observe different perceptions of the police in different communities in Greensboro. I'll read 3 quotes from the post-conversation evaluations. They're all anonymous. So there is a lot of support and respect for our police. We want to do all we can to support them, wrote one person. Another observed that in white communities, people see the police as protection, but in Black communities and low-income communities, people see police as a threat and fear them. If a bond was built with the police, then people won't continue to see the police as a threat. And then lastly, a third person said, a lot of us in our group agreed that fear of police among poor minorities is something that should not exist in a land of liberty and freedom. Police should bring a feeling of safety in our communities, not fear. So let's start by talking about community perception.
So thank you, Jess. So Captain Alston, can we begin with you? Are these comments different from others that you hear about Greensboro Police Department? And how does GPD, stay aware of community perceptions within our city?
Yes, sir. I would say we get different. The perception is different just because of things that I see. And I'll say I know just because of certain things that people see, they have a certain perception of the police. And you will hear me mention a couple of times during these conversations, I'm gonna mention community walks. We do community walks every Wednesday. We pick a neighborhood that may have issues or may not have issues that we may need to address, and we just go and walk the community. The officers get out and walk, the community resource officers, the zone officers, just to get to know the people in the community without any problems, just so you can know who I am and know the officers that work your area. So that's how we try to bond with the community. And I will tell you, when we go to these communities that have a lot of crime and things of that nature, we get a lot of respect from the community. They want us there. They enjoy seeing us. We were doing a walk one time in a neighborhood. They were cooking out. They invited us to come to the cookout and wanted to give us food. So the things that I see when we do go out in the community and we walk, that they want to see us and they want to see us more. That's what I get all the time. And actually talking to different people on the phone, like I get calls from different people in the community all the time, like they want to see us out there. They want to see more of my officers. So I think, for lack of a better word, I get a lot of love in the community when I go out. And that's very important, and it makes you feel good. And the second part of the question, just how we stay aware of what's going on in the community. I mentioned the community walks. People let us know what's going on. They'll let you know what we're doing wrong and things of that nature. So it keeps us abreast of what's going on in the community. And also, we do a lot of things with feeding the community. Over here in Southern Division, where I'm at, we do a lot of feeding the community. We go do food giveaways with different churches and Ys and things of that nature. So we get to bond with the community also and see certain things that they have to say and concerns they have with the police. And also social media. We monitor social media just to gauge the temperature of the community, just to see certain things they would like to see from us or like to see us doing better. That's a big part of the Greensboro Police Department also. And I tell you, I am very in tune with different council members that let me know what's going on in the community and what they're hearing and things that I need to address. So I get it from that angle also. And I think we're one of the departments, I don't know, and I'm sure there's other departments that have it, but we actually have a community engagement section in our department that deals with these things that gauge the community and feed us information on things that we need to be working on.
Thank you so much. So to kind of continue with this, many people in democracy tables conversations talked about fearing the police or worrying that the police feared them on account of their skin color. So Captain Alston, please, can you talk about responding to that fear and its pervasiveness?
I think it goes back to some of the things I just said. If you get out and you talk to the community and you meet them, they get to know you as the person and not just looking at the uniform. When you're dealing with people and I would say they're not in any trouble and you're just talking to them, they can get to know you. And if they do have any fears, then once they get to know that officer, and if you have to come into that area for something bad that has happened in the area, then they can say, oh, I know that officer. I met him the other day. I know I can talk to this officer, so I'll walk up and talk to him. So I think that's how you kind of calm the fears of the community of the police, because we definitely do not want anyone to be scared of the police. We would like for when people see us to stop and talk to us. We want to get out the cars and talk to people. And that's the biggest thing, you know, get out of your car and talk to people in these neighborhoods and walk up to them and talk to them so they can get to know you. And, you know, I can only speak for the Greensboro Police Department, but we do not fear anyone because of their skin color or anything of that nature.
Well, thank you for that response. You know, there was a concern, and I think we listened to on a lot of the conversations for the democracy tables. You know, this connection between policing and police enforcement and racism and preconceptions about race in our city. And I think, I mean, as somebody who's coming from the History Museum, I certainly hear a little bit about the ties to the history of policing in particularly the South. And Mr. Mays, I know you know a lot about this. Could you kind of give us a little bit about that history and how it maybe reinforces certain fears?
Well, the first thing I like to say is that we shouldn't look at the police as a monolith. There is a great deal of diversity in the officer population, as well as between the different policing agencies. They are all not the same. And the history of these agencies are not all the same. Similarly, the community is composed of multiple generations. So there are people who have experiences that may go back 40, 50 some odd years. And then you have people, younger generations whose perceptions are more recent. And so when we talk about perceptions, we have to take into consideration that there's a wide variety of perspectives, and it depends upon how you're situated, because everyone's not situated. Now, there is a history, and you know, I'm of the age where you know, I remember quite a few things from, you know, the 50s and 60s. And growing up as a Black male in 60s. And they're memories that I carry with me. You know, we all carry these memories, these encounters that we have. And so somewhere along the line, we have to make a commitment to try to move beyond those histories. But the first thing we have to do is to acknowledge them. And we also must be careful not to prejudge, because just because a person wears a uniform does not mean that officer falls lockstep with the negative aspects of that history. Similarly, you know, you hear folks talk about, well, just because I wear a hoodie, one should not assume that I am a threat. And so we have to begin to, and I think with the work that the efforts that the Greensboro Police Department is implemented over the last 5-6 years, that they have done things that are creating a space for a dialogue for people to, as Captain Alston said, people can meet and get to know the person behind the badge, and the police officer could get to know the person in the hoodie, so to speak, you know, so we could dispel because there's all sorts of messaging that's out here. And the messaging does not necessarily help us. And that's on both sides. So if I may, just a short story. I attended a Citizens Police Academy, maybe 15, 20 years ago. And there was an officer, it wasn't in this community, but it was another community. And an officer was making a presentation to the citizens and described himself, or the police officer, as the sheepdog. And that citizens were the sheep that the sheepdog was supposed to protect. And I sat there and I said, well, that's not going to get us very far, because the officer doesn't even identify with the citizens, you know. And so, you know, we've made some progress in traveling away from that kind of thinking, but we also need to understand that officers are citizens of the same communities that everybody else lives in, you know, and we need to factor that in to how we understand the dynamic. Okay.
Thank you so
Wonderful.
much.
Thank you for that answer.
Professor Pizio, one of our attendees wanted to know about the difference between policing and community safety. So how do you see the difference?
Sorry about that. Well, I want to reframe the question if I can, because I'm not sure it's the right question to ask. And I feel the way because I think community safety is not so much a difference of opinion, but I think it's a goal of police. So when the police are doing traffic stops or stop and frisks or arrests, and on the other side, community policing, community service, attending community meetings or community walks, as Captain Alston referred to, all that have a singular goal in mind, and that's community safety. I know the term protect and serve may seem overused, but I can't think of a regular duty of a police officer whose goal is simply not community safety. You know, not to go back to what Captain Alston was saying, you know, the perception of citizens, they're clearly different, and we know that. But whether it results from, you know, what we call in academia a cataclysmic event, such as the George Floyd encounter, or something more local, that perceptual difference I think may exist. And as we've seen tonight, you know, fear, and this is, I'm going to qualify this afterwards, I think thwarts police efforts and officers do their jobs in keeping the community safe. I'm certainly not saying the statement to blame the community, because, you know, whether fear is perceived or real is really irrelevant to me. It's a basic human emotion. And so, you know, I think it's instinct. And so if someone is perceiving fear from police, that's real, and that's real to them. I guess the point I'm trying to make is that the underlying tensions felt in many police departments, communities, can make it challenging for police departments and legislators and citizens to navigate the compromises on law enforcement policy that we're working on. You know, we're seeing this action today with several proposed laws, including the George Floyd Policing Act of 2021. And so I think this, I don't know if that actually answers the question itself, but I think this fear or divide or whatever we want to call it can be conquered. But I also believe that it's not a goal that can't be reached. You know, I don't like to use double negatives, but I do strongly feel that it's something that, you know, the two participants earlier said, you know, it's something that we can do, but it is certainly a team effort.
Yeah, and I think I appreciate that statement, and I do feel like that a lot of the comments from the democracy tables were about sort of breaching, trying to understand that gap, you know, and I think a lot of you have addressed that sort of sense that, you know, that we're all, the police and the community we're all humans, and so, you know, if we could find a way to acknowledge that. And one area that people were talking about that I think connects to this is a level of accountability. And there were a lot of questions around accountability, which is our second part of our conversation that we're moving to. So I'm going to share one of our respondents' statements as a way to kind of get us started on this. And they wrote, citizens want to see the police be held accountable for wrongdoings, just like any other person would be in their profession. There has to be transparency for citizens to begin to truly trust. So let's start and shift a little bit of our conversation to talk about how accountability and transparency work in Greensboro. So I guess we'll start with you, Ms. Brown, since you're a commissioner on the Greensboro Criminal Justice Advisory Commission. Can you tell us a little bit about that that body and its responsibilities and its authority?
Yeah, so here in Greensboro, we have a GCJAC, which is the Greensboro Criminal Justice Advisory Commission, but then we also have a Police Citizens Review Board, and those two are separate, but one is still under the GCJAC. So when you talk about the accountability piece, most people may mention the GCJAC, but really they're trying to dig into what do you do on the PCRB. So the PCRB gets cases about complaints. We review those complaints. We make recommendations. We are not an investigatory body, and I know that that is a thing that typically comes up. We don't actually go back and re-interview and investigate and things like that. We just take what came or what comes from internal affairs, review that, and then say, hey, we think you made the right call, or we think you made the wrong call. And then it can possibly get escalated from there. On the GC Jack, we review policies that address and we work to address and monitor issues that may be happening in the community. So I'm also a person who licks their finger, puts it up in the social media sky, and goes out and knocks doors and canvasses and speaks to people on the streets to see how are people feeling about police. Do they feel overly policed? Do they feel like they haven't seen enough police? Do they feel like they've been disrespected? And come back into spaces to give that pulse check within that body and bring that information back. Sometimes it's great, and then sometimes it's not as great. The other thing we do is to help educate the public. Sometimes there is a lack of understanding of like terms, where you may have Captain Alston, I think Captain Alston, did I say that correct? You gotta get your rank. Okay, all right. Where he may come back and say, you know, ma'am, you know, there's this, and this, so I have to do this today. But what someone else hears may be something else totally different, because as a citizen, you may not be abreast of the policies that GPD follows, or what the language or vernacular is that's internal. And then most of us in our jobs, we have like an internal vernacular, and then someone else coming off the street would have no idea what we're talking about. So sometimes we go out and we work to bridge those gaps. So when you hear these things, this is what they're talking about. If you do this thing, this is how the procedures say that they're going to react to it. And sometimes going through and setting that expectation, or then going back and saying, hey, I know that this is the professional expectation of it, but times are changing. And this is when you do that reactionary thing, or when we address the situation in this way, this is the perception that comes back that may potentially erode relationships. So it's like a bridge. So we do not speak on behalf of the police department. We speak on behalf of the public and the citizens, and what they want to see, what they may want communicated. Many of them may not have the time or capacity to be in some of these spaces. So we try to bridge those gaps, and again, review policies that may be on the books that maybe we need to update, maybe we need to review, maybe we need to discuss, maybe the policy's good and people need more training on implementation. But those are some of the things that we work on.
Thank you so much, Ms. Brown. Mr. Mays, apart from issuing specific complaints, what are ways the community can have a say on police matters?
That's an interesting question. And I think we need to unpack it a little bit. First of all, what do we really mean by police matters? Are we saying that the people want to be involved in crafting the rules of engagement for officers, determining what type of training goes on at the academy? Is that what we mean by having a say on police matters? Or are we talking about the review process? Do they want to structure a review process that's transparent, that's that points to more citizen involvement? So we have to, in asking that question, we have to be clear about what level and at what point in the process are citizens asking to be involved. Now, the other part of that is that policing citizens, and I always lament the fact that we took civic education out of our schools, because citizens need to understand the theory and structure of our government, how things get done. Because everything in our system is supposed to operate within the parameters of two doctrines. One, right, is separation of powers. We have judicial authority, which plays a role in how police do their jobs. For example, if a police officer wants a warrant, they have to go to a judicial official. And there are reasons for that. That's a check and a balance. Similarly, we have the separation of powers, so we don't concentrate too much authority and power in one branch of government. Now, policing is within the executive branch of government. And if you go back, and I know we don't have time to get into this, but we need to understand that the impetus for the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights was to limit the sovereign power of government, especially the executive. And that's how we got our Bill of Rights and all of the different citizen protections that exist. So having said that, then there are many different ways in which citizens can be involved. For example, they should seek to find out what's going on with the police and community relations initiatives, support it and get involved. Another example, they should follow the budgeting and funding process, get involved. They should be in touch with their elected officials so that if they're, and I include in that the district attorney, so that if they want input into policies in particular, because we know DAs have discretion just as police officers have discretion in terms of what types of crimes they're going to focus on in any particular jurisdiction. So they should be in touch with their elected officials. They should make sure that any type of open forum or hearing that takes place, that they're present. And so these are just some of the areas or some of the ways in which they can be involved. Similarly, they should make sure that they keep abreast of any new laws that are coming. For example, we talked about the George Floyd initiative, but there are a number of other things that are out there. Efforts to overturn Terry v. Ohio, efforts to deal with profiling. I mean, these are kinds of efforts, you know, and some of the other doctrines I won't go into right now, but they should educate themselves on the law. Another big one with George Floyd was the issue of qualified immunity. Read up on it, understand what it's about, and weigh in at the appropriate places. So there are many places for citizens to have an input. The input, and what I would often tell people, you cannot have that input when there's an incident and you're an observer standing on the street corner. That doesn't work, okay? You need to let the officers do their job. You can be an observer, and then you could follow the complaint process through and provide a statement or be a witness. But that's not where the difference is going to be made.
Thank you, Mr. Mays. So in addition to this, I know Ms. Brown wants to speak a little bit about this. Would you be able to say a little bit more?
Yes, so in my full-time role, I actually left corporate as a person who was very active in community. And when I tell you, as a single parent, as a person who had multiple intersections, as a person who graduated from Guilford County schools, and to be honest, had to struggle and figure things out through college because I wasn't fully prepared. Sometimes in academia, I guess I could say this now that I'm about to wrap up grad school, those things sound good to us, that we have that level to be able to engage. We have the time, our basic needs are being met, you know, our family situation is stable. But when you don't have all of those things and you're likely to be a person who's disproportionately impacted by it, sometimes you actually do need the Mr. Mays to come out and explain this and break this down, because a lot of this, even with an MBA, there are things about policy that I still have to look into and research and dig into. And all of those things actually take time. So I like to say that as people who are sitting in these roles and sitting in these spaces, it is very important that we are the ones that also go out to collect what people are feeling and thinking, because oftentimes the policy solution to that isn't something that's going to be black and white. It's a super complicated thing that one person or a group of people could take 2 years to work on before something's ready to roll out. But that sometimes it's the responsibilities of the citizens to, yes, engage in research, and it's our responsibility to make sure that that information is digestible, that is understandable, that is easy to access, and that when we say that we have these processes that are open, that they actually are in fact open, and that the perception of what we're giving out to people, like people think because I sit on GCJAC or PCRB, that means if an officer messes up, then are y'all going to fire the officer? Like, what are you going to do? I'm like, well, actually, no, that is not how that process works. So sometimes we have to be really clear and open with the public and just direct about this is the operating reality as to where we are right now. This is where we're trying to get to. We would love to bring you along on that process and get your input, and this is what we need, but be realistic about what people's capacities are and how much time they have to research and how much time they have to figure these things out. Because if we want officers to, if officers want to get that trust, right, from communities, then that also comes with the responsibility to be super open and honest about the reality of what it is. Because there are some people in this country that can purchase their way through the penal system. There are some people who, you know, because they have means or because they have an attorney that can go and speak on their behalf, there are certain things that just won't impact them the same way. So I always, instead of just saying, you know, which is, it's just only a polite pushback, yes, there is a responsibility of the citizens, and we have specialists that also work in these fields that should be filtering through and digging into what the will of the people are and going out and keeping in contact with them.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. I know Professor Pizio wants to also speak on this, so we'll go over to him.
I just want to add to what Kay said about responsibility of citizens. You know, one of the things that I find all the time in my classes and when conversations with students is that many citizens don't do their research in relation to what actually happened with some of these bigger events. And I think that's a really important point because, you know, as an example, probably 70% of my students who are criminal justice majors stated very unequivocally that Breonna Taylor was sleeping when she was shot. And that's simply just not the case. And the tragedy notwithstanding, that's not what I'm talking about, but it's hard for police and for legislators and community members to be together if a message that's not quite true is being sent out. There's really no defending the police if you know, once that story goes out, it stayed out. And so I would just want you know, my students and the community to do the research in that regard as well.
And we have institutional players or shareholders in this. I mean, part of the role of our press, the fourth estate, if you will, right, is to provide that kind of feedback for the community, to do some of that digging, to ask the questions in an unbiased way, so that people will have more information to make decisions. But we never get away, and that's the thing about a democracy, about our democratic republic. We never get away. When I raised 5 kids, right, was always super busy. But when somebody had to go talk to the teacher, right, that was a responsibility I couldn't bump off to someone else. And so it's uncomfortable because I hear from citizens, I hear from clients, well, you want me to do X? Yeah, look at my life. You know, I can't do this, I can't do that. I said, yes, but if you want to resolve these issues, right, you have to make some effort. And there was a saying we had back years ago, and we said there are no passengers on Mothership Earth. Everybody's crew. You know, we're all crew, and we all have to work on it. And that's how we have to approach it. That perspective is what we get when you teach people about civics, right? That they understand this thing only works, right, when we put in the effort, right? And nobody's going to do it for you.
Thank you very much. I think, you know, we're going to talk some more too about ways that the community can continue to engage in these processes. And I think it's, I'm writing down notes as well. And I think what we'll try to do is put together some resources about some of these issues as well to continue to share out as part of this project. We're going to come back, I think, to that in part 4. Part 3, though, which we're going to get started on presently, addresses some issues around police training, which I think a lot of our participants in our democracy tables did have questions about and wanted to know more about how police are selected and trained, certainly within our community. One of our survey respondents wrote, our community would like to see implicit bias training and work similar to that of the Center for Policing Equity that addresses racism by diagnosing and tracking racial gaps in policing in order to eliminate these gaps. And implicit bias was just one of the areas related to police training that people in our conversations wanted to know more about. So we will turn to Captain Biffle, who we haven't even had a chance to hear from yet. So it would be nice to get you into the conversation. Can you tell us a little bit about our police in Greensboro being trained about implicit bias? And what does that entail?
It may be good you haven't heard from me. I get very passionate about all of it. We have been doing implicit bias training since 2013. We started looking into the fair and impartial policing in 2013 and rolled it into the fair and impartial training in 2014. Come 2015, we built on it even more with doing training on understanding the science of bias. So the officers could understand everyone has bias. And as Mr. Mays said earlier, you know, memories and encounters, they lead to your bias, unconscious bias that you carry. But we went through that training as a capstone. We then, to add on, we have the tactical communication training, juvenile minority sensitivity training, the state does on a consistent basis. And then we started a procedural justice and police legitimacy training in 2016. That's the training that the whole department went through. And when we give something to the whole department, what we started doing was integrating that into the police academy. So just because you weren't here then, we now have the average basic law enforcement training class is 640 hours right now with the state. Greensboro adds an additional 110 hours because we put in additional courses into our academy that deal with the bias-based training, procedural justice, the de-escalation techniques on communication. So we hear the community and know what the community expects from us, and to provide the better service, we add those additional classes into our academy. As far as the procedural justice, we've also made it a community classroom. So you can come to the training center and you will get an aspect of our procedural justice training so you can understand the police perspective and what happens on the encounters and why we do some of the things we do when we have encounters with citizens. So I am proud to say that we do have that training. We are one of the first in the state to start that. The state mandated training, they did their first equality in policing around 2018 is when they started doing. 2016 to 18 was when they started recognizing and bringing bias into the conversation. So yes, we've had that within the Greensboro Police Department for many years now.
Thank you, Captain Biffle. Before we kind of continue with actually a question for you, I just want to say that we are seeing all your questions on Facebook, and we're hoping to add those to the end. So we see you. We're not ignoring you. So back to you, Captain Biffle. So to follow up on that, what are ways police are trained or expected to de-escalate tense situations? What does that look like? How does that work?
We do the communication skills for law enforcement. I think we all know, and especially the professors and everybody knows, this new generation communicates a lot different. You know, gone is a lot of the face-to-face interaction. A lot of communication is handled with the heads down in the phone. And so the first thing we do is make them more aware of how they present themselves in communicating. And, you know, 93%, I want to say, of your communication is nonverbal. So actually being attuned to the citizen and understanding their needs. We have like I mentioned earlier, the de-escalation training to give the officer more tools to, usually people call us on their worst day to come and solve a conflict. And so we need to bring the right tools to the conversation to help them work through problems and come to a resolve that's best for the community. Right now, we're in the middle of a training, the ICAT training. It's short for Integrated Communications, Assessments, and Tactics. It makes the officers more aware of what to do when they encounter some behavior, mental health related crisis. And, you know, gone are the days where you just go and jump in and make an arrest. Time is on our side. You know, we need to communicate and figure out what the crisis is, bring in other resources we have, and be on the same page with responding officers. Let's stop traffic, let's negotiate more, let's make a scene safe so that we can have a better outcome for all involved.
I think this is especially interesting since we're, a project and a dialogue that's about communication. You're talking a lot about these communication skills that enter into the work that you do. Some folks wanted to know, kind of even to step back, even more basic, just sort of what are the how are officers hired in Greensboro, and sort of what are the sort of baseline qualifications that people need to have in order to start to become an officer?
Baseline, just a desire to serve is what I love to see. For training in North Carolina to have a certification, a minimum of 20. You have to be 21 when you graduate from the academy. Greensboro runs 2 academies a year, and we have open applications year round. So it doesn't, just because our academy doesn't start till September, we'll take an application anytime. But as long as you're 21 years of age, we love higher education, but a minimum is a high school diploma, GED. We love our local community members to be involved and serve in their community, but we get a lot from out of state. You have to just pass a modified physical fitness. We have psychological assessments, and we do a thorough background investigation. And then your application goes before a selection committee, and we make a decision based on that. I say you have to be at least 20. We had a 50-year-old in our last academy. So we run the gamut on age. We love the diversity we get, and the backgrounds. Typically people think, oh, you hire from the military. No, we love the life experience. We love what people bring to their own community through their own trials, tribulations, and what they can bring to the community in a form of service.
Thank you so much, Captain Biffle. So we're going to shift to Professor Pizio. So what is changing with police training in police departments more broadly? I know we've been talking about specific things like de-escalation and training. So could you answer that question?
I could. So I'll just start with a story that's gonna unfortunately date myself. So back in the 1990s, I was a New York State trooper. Underwent a 28-week resident academy. We had about 1,000 hours of training, something around there. We spent so much time on laws and defensive tactics and firearms and physical training. And then we spent about 10 hours, and it was a long time ago, so I'm remembering, it wasn't much, but about 10 hours on what they called multicultural communication. I don't remember much about that because it was an afterthought in the academy, to be honest. We didn't train in de-escalation techniques. We didn't train in encounters with EDPs or mentally ill folks. And there was really no other meaningful training segments that would put the importance on the events that occur prior to use of force. And so for me, a use of force is, this is going to sound oversimplified, less relevant than the 5 minutes before the use of force, because so many of these issues could be resolved with the things that Captain Biffle is talking about. And so, when I thought about this, I think over the years, this has really changed drastically. And the fact that GPD instituted implicit bias training, 8 years ago is amazing. And I feel like given the social climate change that we've had, I think these training segments are crucial. And Tessa, I'd like to ask kind of the amount of hours that they spend in these types of things, because, 20 years ago, policing was, regarded as kind of revolutionary in the sense, but it shifted from, over the past years from a philosophy of give us resources and we can do the job to really realizing the importance of listening to the public in what I like to call co-production of public safety. And that's conversations. And whether it's de-escalation techniques or understanding differences of opinion, that's what that's really all about. So I think so much of this comes down to training in the academy and in the field. You have to have the right academy trainers. We have to pick the right people, and we have to have the right field training instructors. And so, I don't know if that actually answered the question as much as we want it to, but things have changed drastically, and I, I could tell a lot of stories about what happened back then that are just simply not happening now. And I think there's different, phases. I think when I came in, the kind of the litigation phase came, and we come to community policing phase and more of a public phase. And so I think we're really changing. I really do. And I'm hopeful for the future. And hearing Captain Biffle talk about what they're doing with GPD, which I know is being mimicked at a lot of the bigger departments. I'm not sure about where the smaller departments are, but it's really encouraging to me.
Yeah, and to add on that, and to Mr. May's point, Greensboro, we've also instituted since 2019, I take the Academy to the International Civil Rights Museum for a guided tour. And then we have a racial equity discussion afterwards. Because especially, I mean, Greensboro is so rich in history, and you have to understand people's perspectives. I'll never forget doing an accident report, and you're trained. You ask both drivers what happened, and we just document what happened. I went to a gentleman, and he had to be 70 years of age at the time, and he was African American. And I said, "Sir, can you tell me what happened?" He said, "Not going to matter." And it dawned. I mean, he grew up in the civil rights era, and his perception was, it won't matter. You're going to decide because you're the police. And so, especially for our new officers that have come from out of state and don't understand the history, especially of the area and what happened in Greensboro, it's very moving for them to get a better understanding of the community that they're about to serve.
And if I could just make one small comment here, I think the police are ahead of the curve in this, because when you look at the legal community, and I talk to my colleagues, and the legal precedents that we are using, right, don't support the innovations that are happening in policing. And for example, we know this whole thing about no-knock, warrants, that needs to go. Terry stops, which came through Terry v. Ohio 1968 case. We all know what was happening in the 60s. And so the courts were trying to buttress, right, some of the police actions that were going on, right? That needs to change. We could talk about profiling and a whole series of policies and things. The law needs to change. And it needs to change in ways that facilitate the new reality, as opposed to churning out the same kinds of, justifying the same kind of results that we've done in the last 40 or 50 years. And that's the issue with qualified immunity. That's not a left issue. You could go talk to the people at the Cato Institute, which is as far right as you can get, right? And so across the spectrum, people are saying we need to change that. It's a court-made doctrine. There is no legislation behind it. And so I think the police are ahead of the curve in terms of what is being done. And I thank you for that. I thank you for that.
I think this is a really interesting kind of perspective, and learning about some of these training things is really so interesting, because I think that there were things that came up in the conversations that people were like, the police department should be doing this, and you're saying the police department is doing this. So I think as we move into our next section, I think discussing that connection and sort of bringing public awareness to the work that the police department is doing is going to be something that we're going to want to talk about, and also continuing that conversation and reinforcing those dialogues as we continue to talk about the community side of this. Let me and we are kind of collecting some of the great questions from Facebook that we're gonna, if we have time at the end, we will try to get to. But I wanted to sort of move ahead and talk about these kind of issues about changing responses and building trust. And a lot of your examples from the last section about training, I think, are about that. Captain Alston, can you tell us a little bit more about some of the efforts in the GPD really around, that sort of those trust building things? You mentioned several at the beginning about the community walks. Are there other ways that you are, seeking input and seeking that human connection with neighbors and with community organizations who really have this sense that they want to make change in our city?
I really do think that you build trust with positive encounters. And we need as many of those that we can get. And I look at positive encounters as like a bank account. I want to put as many positive encounters into that bank that I can get in there. So when something bad does happen, at least the community knows that that you've been positive in the community and getting to know that officer with the positive encounters. And I really do think that the walks are the keys to building trust, is covering as many neighborhoods that you can cover and getting to know the people and the people getting to know you, and just looking at things as give us a chance, get to learn that officer and give us a chance. Just don't judge the officer based off of things that you've seen on TV and just perception. Give us a chance. If you have an encounter with an officer, just get to know the officer and give them a chance before you have a certain perception of the officer. And the same thing on our end, it's procedural justice, treating people the way that you want to be treated. And that is the key, is making sure you treat everyone the same that you would want to be treated.
Ms. Brown, let's bring GC Jack sort of back into the equation as well, in sort of developing efforts to build those kinds of connections that Captain Alston was talking about. Are there programs or efforts afoot through the commission to bind, to really find ways to connect officers to the communities?
No. So it is not the GC Jack's full responsibility to say, oh, here are our lovely police officers, please trust them. We are community members just like you. What we can do is open the door for additional knowledge, spaces where people can openly communicate. And then it's up to GPD from there to be trustworthy. That is not something that we as a GC Jack can do, nor should we actually be doing that. Our job and responsibility is to work at the behest of the citizens and the people in the community, because that's what they want to see while they're there. So I would say no on that front, but if someone has a question or a concern, do I sit down with them and say, hey, this is the policy, this is why it went that way, and what else happened outside of what you're saying right now, and then get some additional information so that doesn't turn into a counter narrative. Sometimes, yes. Are there times where I, maybe go back and say, hey, maybe this encounter happened like this, and we should unpack the small ways that it could erode relationships with communities? Yes, we do that as well. But that is not us, working on behest of the police department to build those relationships. They have a communications department for that.
Thank you so much, Ms. Brown. Captain Biffle, do you have something else that you would like to share? I saw it in our chat, so.
I was answering chat questions. I don't know if you want to do it at the end and stay on track with
Okay.
with the current topic. I will say I do love what Ms. Brown said about the role of GCJAC versus police. And yeah, we have our own responsibility to make those contacts with the community ourselves, because they play a very important role, GCJAC, of being impartial, being that resource for the community to go to, especially in a trust climate. I like that they don't need to be our advocates for us, so that they can stay that role that they need to be as a check and balance for the police department.
Thank you so much. Captain Alston, can you tell us about GPD's behavioral response team and how it is working?
Like I said, I like to give examples. This unit is doing an outstanding job from what I'm seeing out here in patrol, as far as like helping out the patrol officers in the divisions. And I can give you an example of a young lady from last week that I went by a call that a couple of my guys were on. And the young lady was experiencing some mental health issues, some serious issues, and there was causing her to want to run into traffic and things of that nature. So my officers had to make sure that that didn't happen. And the behavioral response team, they responded with the certified counselor that rides with the officer, and they were able to take the young lady and get her the help that she definitely needed. So they have been a big asset. We hear nothing but wonderful things about them from the community and the officers at the department. And I think they will continue to do some great things.
Thank you so much for sharing about that. I want to ask our two academic folks about other kind of community-oriented policing models that you guys see that are working in other places. How can you maybe each Dr. Pizio, start with you, and then Mr. Mays, share like some kind of community-oriented policing option that you've seen that's worked, or that you tell your students about, or that you share that works other places.
I think one of the things that has been over the past 15 years been, and it's part of the larger body of community policing, is what we call a prevention focused philosophy, or problem solving policing, and it's where police go in and see the problems in the community. If they can solve the problem, a singular problem in the community, then perhaps crime will decrease and the community will be happier. And the easy example is, drug deals happen in areas where streetlights are purposely, shot out or broken out so they can do their things in the dark. They go in there and they fix the lights, and in that area at least, crime or drug dealing may go down. Into the second part of your question about the kind of how are they community led, people who live in communities where crime is higher than other areas, they're the ones that live there. They're the ones that know the community more than police officers could possibly know. And so, these initiatives, be they, clergy police partnerships, or, problem solving policing initiatives, need the community to really help guide the police in where those bigger problems are. And they need them. And so, problem solving policing is a much bigger part of this, but that's I don't want to take too much time, but that is something that, of all the crime prevention strategies out there, elements and certain specific crime problem solving policing initiatives have really seemed to work more than others.
There's not much I would add to that, other than the fact that after hearing the presentation on GPD's community and police relations work, all the new innovations, I think it's good stuff. My hat's really off, to these innovations, and I need to say that because I'm one of those who's been very critical of GPD in the past, and these changes are significant. And so I just want to go on the record and say that.
I will also mention that the city of Greensboro has also done some level of investment in what these models could look like through the Cure Violence program at Gate City Guardians, through having a community liaison that works with because Mothers Against Gun Violence, where some of the women have lost their children due to gun violence. So there are some things that happen outside of traditional policing that we are doing, in addition to having mental health professionals that can go out and answer calls. It's just one of the things that I get feedback from in the community is not necessarily to take away all the police right now, but that we need to be properly investing in those things, and that it is unfair to police departments that they are responsible for policing communities that have gotten perpetual lacks of investment from our legislatures, from our county commissions, and even from our city council representatives, regardless of the party, and that is where some of these root causes are coming from. And until we actually start to address those issues, we can put every model that we want to put out there in any community across the country. When you starve people of resources, when basic needs are not being met, the crime rates go up.
That's an excellent point, which underscores one of the foundations of community policing is partnership. It's a partnership. And because we realize that the police can't, they're outnumbered. They can't do it alone, so they need to work with the community, so we need to build those partnerships, and we need to resource. I think that's a key point that you made, Ms. Brown. We need to resource these partnerships and initiatives.
Yeah, I'll add Ms. Brown is key on funding what needs to be funded with. I had a subject that wanted help at mental health. They did not have room. He did not meet a criteria. So he threw a center block through a car window and said, now you can arrest me. I'll get help at jail, which shouldn't be a solution.
Right.
But
right.
He was in despair and needed assistance. And that was the only way he could find to get assistance.
And what's interesting, because if we follow that through, I spent much of the 80s working in corrections, and both representing correctional institutions and then suing correctional institutions. Those are both sides of the fence there. But not only are the police not equipped to deal with the mental health, correctional institutions are not either. They don't have the capacity. In fact, their mission, right, today, basically, just house them, keep the institution safe. And if they need help, well, that's not our issue. It happens someplace else. And so these are the kinds of things that we have to address.
Thank you so much. So now we are going to go and look at some of the Facebook questions that have been asked. So we're going to try to get to as many as we can, but we know that everyone's time is precious. So I am just going to pick a few that I see here. One question that I see that is offered by Ahmed is, we also want to know about building relations with immigrants and refugee communities, because we do have such a high population of refugees and immigrants in Greensboro. So specifically speaking to that, could, I guess, one of the officers, anyone else who knows as well of our panelists, please speak to this issue.
We're always looking for ways to do the community outreach and offer programs. I know early on there was a question about traffic stops and language barriers. We recently had a training with some departments on deaf, hard of hearing, and some resources for that special population. But the same with the language barriers. We have language lines. We actively recruit for officers with that can speak foreign languages. There are so many there's so many different languages in Greensboro, and we're so diverse, and then there's different dialects within languages. So we're always looking for ways. I've talked with the Office of Community Engagement of possibly hosting a Citizens Academy for Spanish speaking citizens, craft one just for Spanish speaking, so that we can do further outreach to that population. So we're always open to and looking for opportunities to reach to communities that either mistrust or just need more involvement with police. I would like to go ahead and give the Office Community Engagement number, 336-373-2636. That's where you can do the speaking request from the police department. Someone had asked how to get the procedural justice community classrooms. Call that number. We can get coordinated through that number, through our Office of Community Engagements.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm just going to look for one more or a third question as well. I see that one of, just 1 second. So As far as youth in the community, people want to know how youth can get involved in becoming possibly a police officer. And so let me specifically look to the question of, I believe it is Miss Pierce. She writes that she wanted to know a little bit more as far as that goes. Unfortunately, the question kind of, it's not on my screen as far as Facebook goes, but she was asking about youth and getting them involved in policing and how that would kind of go about and what you do as far as that goes. So anyone can answer that.
We have restarted our Police Explorer post aimed at high school and young adults to get them involved in the police department. That's a great recruiting tool, and I'm glad we've brought that back. Our SROs are invaluable in making those contacts in high schools and building relationships with the youth and getting them interested in policing. But that's, our SROs are our biggest contact that give the positive relationships with the youth and that lead to both Captain Alston and I are on the selection committee. And we've seen quite a few applications come through recently where they were touched by their SRO, their school resource officer in high school, and wanted to follow the path. So.
Great, thank you so much. I think we're going to ask just one more question. If anyone else would like to answer this as well. There was a question as far as Dr. Poulos, who's actually my professor. So shout out to you. Thanks for writing this question. I don't have it specifically in front of me, but one of the things that was kind of coming up in the conversations was about, and we've talked a little bit about this, was de-escalation and conflict management. So would you be able to speak a little bit to certain restraints that are used, what are not used along those lines? So either Dr. or I keep wanting to say Dr. Captain Alston or Captain Biffle, if you could answer to this, or anyone else as well.
I'm sorry, repeat that question one more time for me, please.
Oh, just speaking more to conflict management and certain types of restraints that might be used or that are not used in.
There was a young lady.
I'm sorry, I think it was a little muffled, but she was asking about the types of restraints that are used and are not used. And that was the question that was coming up.
Thanks, Ms. Brown.
Oh, yeah, the type of restraints that we use when we taking people in custody. Just make sure I got the question right. Okay. Of course, you got the standard handcuffs that we use, and we also have a limb restraint that we use, and we mainly use that on subjects that are combative, and we use those limb restraints to just restrict the movement of a person's legs if they're doing any type of kicking or things like that, any type of assaultive behavior.
Okay. If there's anything else that someone wants to speak to, this is probably the time. If not, I think we are going to start wrapping it up.
I did want to ask, you guys have covered so many different things, and, we did ask you a whole broad range of questions. And I feel like almost each of these sections, even each of these questions could almost be a program in itself. There's been so much to learn about, but to really kind of isolate it down to, if you, and I want to ask this to each of you, what would you say to sort of one citizen in Greensboro about a way, like just one way they could either improve engagement with the police or improve awareness about the situation of public safety in our city? And let's start with, let's see, who should I start with? I'm going to start with Ms. Brown.
So basically, what would I say to the community about, issues around policing?
Just one, just if you could pick one way and you could share one piece of information or one group or one way they could, tune in to, be aware of what's happening. I mean, you mentioned several earlier on.
Yeah. I would say to engage the best way that you can, get support from other people in your community whenever you can, if you're having issues. Just engage. And sometimes when you hear no, that's okay. Just keep engaging. And that every issue that we see on the surface that projects or presents itself as an issue around policing, sometimes it's another issue. Sometimes it's a lack of investment. Sometimes it's a lack of resources. Sometimes it's a lack of food. Sometimes there are other things that are happening that policing has just been a thing that we've used to solve things that's not what it's supposed to be used for. So just engage and keep going. And GCJAC has meetings posted along with recommendations and like other things that we're doing on the website. So if you type in GCJAC, like GCJAC in Greensboro, it's also on the city site. You can get the meeting schedules and dates.
So folks can tune into that information as well that your commission's doing. Thank you. Dr. Pizio, what would be your suggestion?
I think, and I'll keep this very short, whether you're pro-police or anti-police or struggling or on the fence, when you see a police officer maybe doing a community walk up and say hello. Just, having, I think what Captain Alston talked about is, we have a lot of involuntary encounters where police are involved getting in your life. Engage in one and be proactive in having a voluntary encounter. And you may find that you're very surprised at how police are and how they are human beings, and want to hear from you.
Thank you. Let's see, Captain Biffle, what would your suggestion be?
It's funny that Professor Pizio left and we want to hear from you. Mine was speak up.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know what we don't know. Good or bad, we need to know so that we can help or we can improve. So just speak up.
And what are the best, what's the best, and is the community line that you gave earlier the best way to kind of speak up on that?
That's the Office of Community Engagement. If it's speak up because something's wrong, we have our professional standards, also called internal affairs. That's 373-2468. If you're not comfortable there, reach out to the Police Community Review Board and use Ms. Brown and her resources to get answers. So yes, we have any form of, but the Office of Community Engagement at the 373-2636. If you just want to get involved and volunteer, we have great volunteer opportunities too.
Thank you so much. Captain Alston, what's your suggestion?
Pretty much what everybody else was saying. Just try to be engaged in the community. If you see something wrong, speak up about it. If you see an officer doing something wrong, speak up about it. Call professional standards. If you see crime, that's one of the biggest things. Speak up about it. Call us and let us know about it. I know certain people are kind of scared to say certain things in front of people when they see crime happening, but you can always get in touch with an officer and talk in private about things. So don't keep things to yourself. Speak up about it if you're having any issues, because we're here all the time that something was going on over here, but I don't know it unless you tell me. So if something's going on, tell me. And I'm not going to mind if it's the 4th or 5th time I've heard it, just as long as you're speaking up and telling me what's going on. We appreciate the help.
Thank you so much. Mr. Mays, you gave us several levers for citizen involvement earlier on. Is there a specific one you'd encourage people to make sure they can pull?
Sure. And pick up on something that Dr. Pizio said earlier. I would advise citizens to not just engage police, but engage each other in this particular way. don't further incorrect or spurious accounts about things that have happened and you don't know the truth. Just don't do that, because so much, by the time misinformation or disinformation travels, it creates problems that sometimes can be quite harmful to individuals and to the community. And so this is going back to this point about responsibility. We need to be responsible for truth telling. And we also need to be responsible for encouraging, well, let me just sum it up this way, for building community, And that is inclusive of making sure that we communicate to our neighbors that I don't want crime here. And we have an ally, we have partners here that can make crime not happen. But we have to do our part. And so that's what I would work on, because far too often we say the situation exists because of the other guy. Well, guess what? We're the other guy. Let's take responsibility for our community. That's what I would say.
Thank you so much to all our panelists. We are coming to a close now. So I want to say thank you specifically to Captain Richard L. Alston, I keep saying it like Austin, from Greensboro Police Department in the Patrol Division, and Captain Teresa J. Biffle from the Greensboro Police Department in the Training Division, Kay Brown from Greensboro Criminal Justice Advisory Commission, James Mays, Esquire, Attorney at Law, and Will Pizio, Dr. Will Pizio, Professor of Criminal Justice at Guilford College. So thank you all so much. And I know we're going to have Glenn finish us out. So thanks.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Jessica, for helping out with this program. I also like to thank Laura Allen, who our intern, who's been working in the background, making this all possible. And of course, to anybody who's viewing this or viewing the recording, it's an important topic. We're going to keep talking about it. Let us know if there's resources that you heard about on this program that you'd like links to. We will do our best to provide those and build some more resources through which people can engage with these important issues for the city of Greensboro. I want to be sure to invite you to be part of the conversation at our next Democracy Tables. We'll be talking about housing and equity starting March 27th. You can join in on our conversations. They're small group conversations facilitated by UNCG students and community members. Give you a chance to talk about your experiences with housing, the barriers you see people facing in our community, and potential solutions that we can find to work together to make that housing in our neighborhoods more equitable. As Kay Brown mentioned, there's a lot of threads that tie all these issues together in our city. And so we're going to try to keep talking about those with Democracy Tables. So you can learn more by going to greensborohistory.org/democracy tables. We hope to see you there. And thank you everyone once again. And I hope everyone has a wonderful evening.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.